You're listening to the Slavic Literature Pod, your shelf help guide to all things Slavic.
I'm Cameron Lalana.
And I'm Matt Gerasmovich.
And today we're talking about Part 1, Chapter 55 of Vasily Grossman's Life and Fate, continuing on with Krimov's story in Stalingrad as he's visiting the men of Lieutenant Colonel Batsyuk. In this particular case, speaking with some snipers, a rather unsettling conversation for Krimov before he chats more with the lieutenant. We have this sort of interesting unease of Krimov among the Red Army soldiers, which is not typical for a commissar among lower ranks. But we'll get into that. Is there anyone in particular that you would like to begin?
No, I just like that Krimov was kind of like, I miss the good old days where he could be out killing people and whatnot. And then he, in this chapter, is more retrospective and kind of walking that back a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting point that Grossman is kind of bringing to the fore here, a little maybe even controversial at times.
Right.
And it's one that tends to get lost in the sort of, I don't want to say propaganda, but the intense feelings that would come along with warfare. Because I don't know, I haven't fought in a war, so I couldn't say for sure. But
Sure.
part of it to me seems that you would have to really have some element of dehumanization of the other side in order to really feel okay with killing someone. And like I said, don't know, haven't done it, but that's what I think. And that is kind of what this chapter is about, as Krimov is at this, they're at like a sort of meeting of the snipers for this regiment. And Krimov is kind of just the witness to the different stories that everybody is telling, and they're sort of tallying up how many people they've killed. And there are some stories where Krimov is feeling really not good about them. And this one where one of the Soviet soldiers is talking about how he saw a German walking down a path with his arm around a woman, and he made them drop to the ground and then get back up and then drop to the ground and then get back up and then drop to the ground and then get back up, and then he killed them. And actually it's not clear if he's just kind of doing this sort of almost like he's toying with like an animal or something on while he's hunting. And Krimov really feels like this is not right. And it's well, to say the least, it's an interesting question that Grossman is starting to pose here.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, on one level, we can understand this from Krimov's point of view, and I think it does lead to an interesting point here where he's kind of thinking, I'm not lily-livered. I'm not someone who's afraid of getting my hands dirty. Historically, I've advocated for the ruthless elimination of the Aseres, of party enemies, all this, but. It could be, you never know who's among these soldiers are fighting. It could be a worker, it could be an internationalist, whatever. It could be someone who believes what we do. And so because he's uncomfortable with it, and as he's reflecting on it, he also he kind of conveys that to their commanding officer as they're talking after this sort of conversation, when he kind of gets up and excuses himself. And I think on one level it's interesting to see him discomfort being given to him of it, because I think um as he remarks later, he kind of let me read this line. Ever since he had arrived in Stalingrad, Krimov had had a strange feeling. Sometimes it was as though he were in a kingdom where the party no longer existed. Sometimes he felt he was breathing the air of the first days of the revolution. Now that's an interesting thing to say, as after he's coming off this chapter where these soldiers are very clearly not fighting for the revolution. They're fighting for very sort of personal reasons, and I think that's something about the revolution, is that at that point in time, it was a much more varied set of reasons. The Soviet state didn't yet exist. People were coming to it for more as a reaction than as fighting for something, oftentimes. So that's that on one level, but also it's just I think part of it's just a lack of like he's got good Soviet principles for limiting who he does, but these soldiers don't. They're killing because they're angry, they're mad. Like you said, they've thoroughly dehumanized the fascist invaders. Many of them, with fairly good reason. They've had pretty tough experiences. A number of family members or villages being killed. But yeah, it's still interesting that given discomfort with it, and um, I, I it's I'm still trying to gather all my thoughts on it, but as I go through it too, right? Like I feel a little uncomfortable with that kind of gleeful description of such killing or almost reveling in it. And so it almost makes you wonder: is there something more personal that goes into that? For whenever Kremov has been shown in battle, he's always had this heroic edge to him, where he doesn't kill the kill, he kills for the party. And when you get away from take away the power of the party, similar to Abarchuk when he's not doing something to party, he isn't comfortable with doing something for himself, even if it's in the end the same action, same sort of action, I should say.
Yeah, and he tries to talk to Batyuk about this at the end of the chapter, and nothing comes of it. He falls asleep instead, and Krimov is kind of left wondering and left having these thoughts kind of alone about like, it's not like it's not just are we doing the right thing, but it's sort of are we going about it in the right way? Do we have not just the moral high ground, but is there sort of is there a line that is being crossed in some ways? Um, so I don't know. Again, it's difficult to kind of parse this out, but I think it's a question that Grossman does continue to explore throughout the novel, and something that um kind of it's a broader issue that he's bringing to the fore here, and in one that shows not just the power of ideology, but the sort of danger of dehumanizing the other, whatever that may be. Because that is something that continues to today and is a historically important thing that happens. Not important in a good way, but important in a very bad way, as something that happens generally before conflict and, mass exterminations, essentially.
Right. Yeah. There's a line. I think this will come back to haunt us as Kremov's storyline continues. There's no place for Christian humanitarianism now. Our Soviet humanitarianism is something more stern.
Yeah, humanitarianism generally isn't defined or considered something that is stern, I would say.
Yeah. So I kind of put that line in the same category as the soldiers, the Russian, the Red Army soldiers in the camp at the beginning, consoling themselves that yeah, we got it pretty tough, but man, imagine being in one of our camps. That'd be tougher.
Yeah, it's it's an interesting chapter, I will say.
Yeah, yeah. But in the end, there are a couple. There seem to be among maybe I don't want to say to differentiate the communist of the party members in this between like sort of true believers and sort of the true believers in the Soviet idea and true believers in the Soviet system as it is. I'll put Getmanov and Krimov in two opposite ends of that spectrum. Either way, when it gets down to it, when you get to Novikov and Batyuk, they're certainly not carrying on the war for the same reason that Krimov and Getmanov have in their head.
Yeah, there's definitely a spectrum of belief here for sure, and a spectrum of well, I don't know what you stand to like personally gain from it. That you know, I don't know. Krimov is definitely a bit of an idealist in this sense, but I think like his sort of power is that he recognizes it at least in a little bit in the sense that he's thinking this, but he knows that he can't really say it because it's going to be kind of demoralizing to pose that question, borderline illegal at this time in the war. No one's asking the question really, well, what about the Nazis? Krimov, he's definitely not going to be the one to pose that.
Right. Yeah, that would I think get you accused of being a Trotskyist pretty quickly.
Be accused of a lot of things, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, a couple things along there, none of them good.
No, no, definitely not.
All right, well, I think maybe that's a good place for us to stop today.
I agree. And In that case, you will hear from us again soon.